Hi, I'm Beth Rattay. I'm the president of the Boston New Music Initiative. Today, I'm here with Sarah Hennies, and we're going to talk about her work, Clock Dies. So, Sarah, actually, really quick for anyone in our audience that doesn't know you, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself and your music?
Yeah, I am a composer and a percussionist. My ultra quick bio is that I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, and playing in like kind of indie rock bands. And then as a teenager, started playing, quote unquote serious percussion and got really into experimental music at a pretty young age. And then um, have been making my own music for a long time, but studied percussion in college and grad school. And then around 2009, after a lot of time in like a weird band and playing a lot of improvised music, I started to get really serious again about like capital C composing, like making fixed, repeatable work. Um, and so I'm like very much still a percussionist, but I hardly ever play music that isn't mine anymore as a percussionist, which is a little bit weird. But I don't know. I'm a composer of mostly acoustic, mostly smaller ensemble chamber music. And I also, since 2019, I've been at Bard College as a electronic music and percussion, electronic music and composition professor.
Cool. All right. So this piece, Clock Dies, is from 2021, so pretty darn recent. Oh, the recording was from 2021. Was it? It was.
The piece was finished in 2021. I think it probably started in the fall and ended before the concert in the summer, but
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Um, so is there like, I don't know, what would be your little spiel that you'd give people like if you were asked to talk about it before at a concert?
Well, I for a very, very long time have been working with repetition, and um starting around 2009, that usually meant like repetition of a single sound for like long periods of time and doing this sort of hypnotic psychoacoustic thing. And at some point that turned into using repeating patterns instead of repeating sounds. So like doing that. And then I felt like this piece, Clock Dies, was one of those moments, one of like maybe two or three moments in the last 15 years where I made something and was like, oh, we're in a new place now, like creatively for myself. And it's still really heavily based on repetition, but it's a lot more complex, and that there's like the winds, the strings, and then the piano and percussion also have seem to kind of operate on their own wavelengths. So it's still repeating patterns, but much more complex because there's so much more going on. But the ins excuse me, the inspiration of the piece came that I was doing a lot of reading about bipolar disorder and circadian rhythm, and that I kept seeing references to like words like cyclical and clock-like and all this stuff about like repetition and irregularity, and thought, well, gee, that sounds a lot like the music that I write. and um and started thinking about, and unrelated to this topic, I was thinking about like analyzing psychologically like why I do the things I do musically and creatively, as like what part of like me is this expressing, like why have I chosen to do this thing that is deeper than just like it sounds neat, or I like what happens, I like the music or whatever, that there's some kind of psychological basis for it. And so I found out that through some light Googling that humans, mammals, have an actual, like scientists call it, a circadian clock, it's called the clock gene, that's very, very closely synced with the 24-hour cycle of the Earth and the sun, and that no one knows exactly why, but like in the treatment of mood disorders, one of the first things they say is like sleep regularly, go to bed and wake up at the same time every day, because it's believed by a lot that there's some connection between disruption in circadian rhythm and like irregular mood cycles. And so the piece isn't really like directly based on that, but like kind of in a way. like the piece isn't about anything necessarily. It's just this sort of, it's just what came out of me, you know, and then was doing all this reading and was like, well, that kind of sounds like what I'm working on. Um, and more generally than that, I have like done a lot of thinking and writing about what I was saying earlier about how a lot of the things I do creatively are the result of some kind of like social experience or, you know, the result of my collection of life experiences. And then I started to ask the question, and this is what I'm really interested in like right now is there a neurological basis that like the example I think about a lot is like, why was I such a good drummer at such an early age? Like, what drives a 4-year-old to be like music, 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 you know? And no one, I don't come from a musical family. No one was pushing me towards music. It like happened on its own. And so I'm really on one level, I'm just trying to answer this question of like, why am I like this? You know? Um, because that I had there's a video on my website from this event called Queer Trash that I was a part of several years ago at Issue Project Room, where I wrote and read aloud while performing this essay where I was trying to answer the question of why did I choose to play drums? And in writing that revealed all this stuff about like gender and identity that I had never thought about before. And so that was in 2018. And since then that those kinds of questions are like really interesting to me about like people who are like, you know, like someone who is just like the greatest basketball player you've ever seen, that like Michael Jordan was good at basketball in a way that like cannot be learned. And
Mhm.
so like what is that, you know? And I have no idea. This is all very like armchair neuroscience, but that was a very long explanation about this piece, but that's like the general area of what I'm working on like right now with recent pieces and really since I made this piece, Clocked Eyes.
Yeah. There's a lot of really cool things. Like, so one of the things that I really enjoyed about this piece was sort of and you like talked about it a little bit in your intro, like how there's basically layers and like, well, I feel like the way that you kind of put it together, especially in the first section, it really is prominent. Where like everything is almost every player is almost in their own tempo is kind of how it comes
Mhm.
across. It's like because they're all subdividing in different ways, but it kind of just feels like, but yet it creates this feeling of like regularity without regularity. Like, yeah.
Yeah, it's and I actually because I've used the phrase like irregular repetition or like an irregular repeating pattern in a lot of pieces, and it seems to always confuse people. Like I haven't found the right language to communicate exactly what I mean because you know, like what is an irregular repetition? You know, it makes sense to me, but that it's like a thing that repeats, but within the repeat, something is not regular. So you know, like a pattern that's like messed up a little is
Right.
kind of the easiest way to explain it. But that also, I had read Oliver Sacks' Musicophilia over the last few years, and there's a piece that I just premiered last month actually in Germany called Motor Tapes that was a a much larger expression of a different kind of idea than Clocked Eyes, but like very, very much in the same space, based on that Clocked Eyes was also partially inspired by that this neuroscientist named Rudolfo Yinas coined this term motor tapes, that he theorized that these are the words that he used. He theorizes that the brain is a giant collection of tape loops and that are just always running, that always running, and that when your mind or body does something, that's your brain calling up the loop that it needs to make that collection of muscles like do things. Um, and then of course, you know, there's like this vast portion of the brain that we don't understand. And so that's like really, really interesting to me that the idea that there's a bunch of stuff running all the time up here and we have no access to it, but we have this awareness that it's there, you know, which feels like a different kind of irregular repetition, but that like I intellectually understand that there is a brain in which uh, a large portion of it I have no access to. but I know it's there, I don't know, I'm just like fascinated by this.
Like it made me think of well like in Alzheimer's patients that aren't able to recall things, but like how music will trigger it and actually allow them to remember things or like
Oh
other
wow.
yeah. They've done some like in Alzheimer's patients, like music will like if they hear a melody or something that they know, all of a sudden they're able to access it again. It's almost like
Right.
unlocked the tape loops. It's kind of
Yeah, in a kind of reverse way, in the Oliver Sacks book, there's a chapter on people that experience musical hallucinations, where like they don't just hear music in their head, they hear music as though it was physically present with them. And he said that of all the patients that he's seen that experience these, invariably the music that they hear is songs from their childhood. And so they're hallucinating things that they heard in early life. And so there's just all this mysterious stuff about music and the brain that seems like so closely tied to like psychology and one's identity, but no one is exactly sure what that link is, which to me is like exactly what making and listening to abstract music is like, where it's like I'm feeling something like really intense right now, but it's the thing is not telling me what it is. And
Mhm.
so you have to kind of like go off and make sense of what it is that's happening to you, which is how I feel like as a person just in general. And so, it's not surprising to me that this is the music that I've decided to make, but that like that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about as far as like the art that one makes being a result of some subconscious expression of something that's like happened to them or they're experiencing or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, that's
And so
fascinating.
I'm trying to work once I realized that I was doing stuff like this, I'm trying to work now in a way that if I just notice that I feel like doing something, like if a thought keeps coming back to me, like for instance, I had two different dreams. I don't have music dreams like hardly ever, but around like 2018, I had two different dreams about a piece with a percussionist like throwing things into a bucket. And I just thought it was so funny that I like put it into two pieces. And one of them, this piece called Reservoir One, it's for three percussionists and piano. There's this long section where we're dropping bricks into a bucket, like these big metal wash tubs. And it like when I heard it back on the recording, it's just like, God, this just sounds like you're being punched in the face like over and over again. And it took on this really like very serious, really beautiful thing based on this like goofy dream that I had that I just thought was funny. And so I'm really like, especially with like dream stuff, it's like I thought of it. Like it's up here for some reason, but I don't know why. So if I can put it into a piece, then like you can kind of look at it from the outside and that it's really exciting.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I love it. Um, what was another question about this piece? Like I also you kind of talked a little bit about like you mentioned the word hypnotic about this piece, but also like it's very hypnotic and almost like meditative. Um, I so actually one I kind of have two directions of questions. Well, one is I'm kind of curious. This piece it's a long piece because like it has the cycles and it kind of goes through all these repetitions and iterations. And it definitely like it needs that the way that it is. It needs to have that space. I'm wondering. I don't know if you've talked with any of your performers on this piece or other pieces similar, like what their experience is, whether they also like as an audience member, I feel it like it accesses something in my brain that is like subconscious where I like can just be in the flow and kind of just pay attention in the moment. And I'm actually curious about what a performer's experience of it when they're performing it. Has anybody told you about it?
I have one story where when we were filming the video of this piece, because it was the day after the premiere, so it was the same venue, and they had already played the piece once, and or I might have been the other way around, but whatever. That the whole last, 7 minutes of the piece is this like very, very simple, soft, pretty repeating thing. It's like almost in G major, I think. And I don't totally know where it comes from because I didn't study composition in school, so I don't have a lot of the like damage that people have of being forced to do things or not do things or whatever. But I have this little goblin in my head that's like, if you write music that's easy to play, then people won't take the performers aren't going to take you seriously. And so I had never worked with this group before, and I'm coming in and they were amazing and like just like so just instantly responsive to any kind of like, no, do it this way. But at some point in a rehearsal, I just kind of made some offhand like muttered some self-deprecating comment about the end being easy to play, and he looked at me dead serious and said, "This is the hardest part of the piece." And I was like, "What?" And he was like, "Are you kidding? For seven people to play perfectly in unison half notes at a slow tempo with silence on both sides." He's like, it was so nerve-wracking. And but when you listen to it, it just it you can just, it like washes over you. It, like it's so, as someone who's performed a lot of like really intensely either still or meditative music, it's like the performance experience is so different from listening to it because you're up there like working and like you have to like focus on the thing that you're doing, because if you are playing unison half notes for 7 minutes, it's like if someone's off once, it's like it's
Yeah.
like this huge thing. And so it was it was really nice to hear that, actually. Not because I needed to like have my neurosis fed that like, oh no, it actually is hard to play, but that um what I mean is that it's like it's just a stupid hang up to have. It's like it doesn't matter if it's hard or not. Like doing anything in a nice way is some like version of challenging.
Mhm. Yeah, that piece. Yeah, and they also all play with like no vibrato, or they're on open strings, like strings for a long time. It's a lot. If any, yeah, if there's
Yeah,
any.
I mean, I tried to keep the writing of the parts like fairly simple because it's like even three simultaneous repeating patterns is like complicated. And if the instrumentalists were like doing too much, or if it was seven repeating patterns instead of three or whatever, then it would lose the effect of like, oh, I'm hearing simultaneous processes, rather than I feel like it would turn into sort of a jumble, like it would lose that kind of focus of like, oh, we're hearing repeating cycle, like we're hearing cyclical music rather than a bunch of stuff going on at the same time.
Yeah, I actually think that this piece kind of like um there's a few spots where it feels like the cycles like there it has like this sort of cyclical nature, and then there's a few spots like with the big everybody's all together at C, like where that thing,
Is that the big chord?
the big chords,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
like pulls you out of the cycle, even though that also has like some cyclical stuff to it, but it's like a I actually that section when I first listened to the whole piece, like the opening kind of has this the different cycles and almost like a clock-like feel. Lots of different pieces, almost like it like my image, and no, partly because of the clock image, but like it's almost like there's a bunch of different clocks, they're all kind of going at their own thing. And then after that big section with those chords, I feel like it loses not I don't know if it's like rhythm, but it loses that sort of intense rhythmic feel and becomes more about like the sounds and less about like um a specific rhythm or a cycle. And I was kind of curious if there was at that point it feels like a break in the music that's kind of like a before and after, at least to me. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm like, so when I was writing it, I was not thinking this directly about this. Like I was a little bit, but it wasn't like in a narrative way. But I'm also still just like learning to talk about this in a way that I'm not like anxious about. But I had bipolar symptoms come into my life like 2 or 3 years before I wrote this piece, like having never experienced that, at least having never knowingly experienced that before. And once it really like presented itself, it was kind of like, oh, I think that this was actually present all the time. It just something happened that like I was under like a lot of stress for a prolonged period of time, and we had a baby, and so I wasn't sleeping, and I was gone 3 days a week for my job, and just, all this craziness. And I had become a self-employed musician for the first time in 2018, and so I was traveling all the time, and so my life was like just all over the place, literally. And it it would just be this like go 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 kind of thing. And um it it now, in looking back at the piece, it seems like very obvious to me that that's what this is, but I wasn't thinking of it this literally, but that at least that chord, that moment in the piece, I was thinking of like that these moments can happen where just everything is like the most clear and the most overwhelming and amazing, but like kind of still has this sort of like underlying like friction to it or something. And I don't know, a good story is that before any of this happened in my life, the piece I mentioned earlier, the Reservoir One, was written during this period where I was just traveling constantly, and it was for my trio with my friends Greg Stewart and Tim Feeney and this pianist Philip Bush. And we had a recording date set, and I had not written the piece at all because I can't write while I'm traveling. Like, it's too hard to be creative and be running all over the place at the same time and playing concerts. And finally, between trips, I had written the piano part, and then I left again. And it was literally like a week before the show, before the recording, rather. I had a few days and I was about to go to South Carolina. And one of the things that made this possible is that it's written for like my trio. And so I was able to do things in the score where I would write like low friction sound, but what that really meant was like, Tim, do that thing you do with your fingers, So there were certainly some shortcuts available to me, but I got home and I wrote this piece in like 5 days, like an hour of music and a finished score. And then I left again. And it wasn't until I was on the way to South Carolina, I'm looking at the score, that it dawned on me that I was like, how did I do this? Like, it was not how did I do it, but like I remember vividly asking myself, why can I do that? Like, this is a piece that I really love. Like, it doesn't feel like it was written quickly. And it wasn't until after this diagnosis where I was like, oh, that's why I can do that. And then I read this book by Kate, and she's a psychologist, and called Touch with Fire. That is this, it's a book about what's the right word? Laying out like an actual link between creativity and bipolar disorder, because this is a very controversial topic in the psychiatric field about like the mad genius stereotype. But she wrote this just insanely well-researched book with like dozens and dozens of artists dating back hundreds of years who are journaling what are essentially like them recounting symptoms of bipolar disorder, but not knowing what it was, of like, I don't know, I'm not Thoreau, but somebody like Thoreau, somebody from that long ago being like, I will have great periods of creativity and then fall into a deep darkness. It's like, obviously that's what was going on. And so there's a lot of stuff in her book that also that I was reading while I was writing this piece, where the phrase that it suggests a broken internal clock, or I don't not know if it's exactly the right words, but that it's all about like irregular cyclicity, and or I don't know if cyclicity is a word, but yeah, understood.
Yeah.
But it's like I've made so much music from the same place of like, I'm experiencing something difficult, and so I'm putting it into music. And so that's really just what I was doing with this piece. But outside of that, musically, just totally from an aesthetic standpoint, it was just something I was like really, really excited to listen to, because it was so just directly related to what I had been working on, but it was like seemed really, really new and exciting for me. Like, just a really different kind of piece. And I'm sorry if I'm rambling for too long, but
Fine.
it was part of the way. I keep shifting topics, but one of the main driving forces of this piece was that the Tali ensemble said that they needed it to be with a conductor.
Mhm.
And I've made a lot of pieces using a timer, and they were like, we want a conductor. And so I was like, I want to see if I can write a piece of chamber music with like parts and a form and a big, like all of the elements of chamber music, but like doing what I do. And it gave me this amazing piece. Just that little thing of like, we need a conductor generated this just really, really new kind of piece that was really like, I really, really love this piece.
In what way had you kind of was it a difference in notation, how you present it, between like having a conductor and like other pieces that you'd written before? What was it that like made this one different?
A lot of my scores, it'll look kind of like a cage number piece where it'll be a couple measures of music with start at 2 minutes and at 4 minutes 30 seconds or whatever. And so I'll generate the music notation in a notation software and export it as images and put it into InDesign, and then I can just move things around and make these like nice looking scores. And so the clock dive score is just a through composed
Right.
regular old score. There's nothing unusual about it at all. Which weirdly I had never done before.
Um, um, in do you feel like that doing it in that way made you think differently about it, about your music or the piece?
Yeah, yes, I'm trying to connect with how exactly that. I don't know if it didn't make me think differently, but I chose to think differently of like, I'm going to make a piece that is not reliant on a timer for form, and I'm going to minimally I'm only going to rely on repeat signs at a much lower structural level than like a wider. It's still big blocks of sound, but there's more development happening within a section than just like play this for 5 minutes, you know. But
Um,
it's still like there's a lot of repeat signs. Like there's repeat signs around everything, almost everything.
when you create a piece such as this, and you're creating your cycles, how do you decide how many times to do something? Is it like you listen to it and decide that's when it's done? Or yeah, it's your process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I get asked this kind of a lot, and I always feel bad. It's a really boring answer, but I just think like, how long can I listen to this, or how long do I want to listen to this before I feel like something else should happen? And
Mhm.
then sometimes I might push something like a little bit, quote unquote, too long to like make the audience like wait for something. But in general, it's super straightforward. It's really intuitive over like just what feels right, honestly. Um, and I would say about the musical material in general, in the last 4 or 5 years, I've started really intentionally like writing in a more free way about not trying to be so rigorous about like choosing just the perfect little sound for every single moment, and just being kind of free and just seeing what happens, because I just used to not allow myself to do that, but I was just like, no, I need to like, I couldn't just sit down and just write freely, like I need to, I've got to be like super rigorous about everything,
You had to
which I think has
curate
also given the
yourself.
music like an openness that it didn't have before.
Yeah, I really um the like there's a section that uh there's like I forgot which section it is, but it's I think in the second half. Oh yeah, after we have the in the second half, not quite the second half, but there's the strings are doing like on their open strings in the and then you have freely placed notes
Oh
like
yeah,
that,
in the
um,
piano and percussion,
in the
right?
piano and percussion.
Yeah.
And that is that something like that was kind of that's a newer for you to like is that along the lines of the kind of freedom or was that something that was always present?
That kind of freedom has always sort of been there. It was that actually is a moment where having a conductor changed how I would have notated something, because in the past I probably would have just made a little box with 6 pitches in it and said play freely, but
Mhm.
instead I like wrote out an order of pitches across a repeat sign in which the rest of the instruments are playing measured music. and the notes are written in a certain order, but the rhythm is free, so they don't have stems on them. And the percussionists did this really beautiful thing that when I heard it, they're playing with their fingertips on the vibraphone and the glockenspiel, and I heard that, and it was so funny because I was like, wow, what a great idea. And then I had this thing like, wait, did I write that? And I had to ask them that. I was like, did I put fingertips in the score? And I was about to say, because it sounds amazing. And they both started smiling and they were like, that was our idea. Do you like it? And I was like, yes. It's really, really pretty.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. And it's, yeah, right there. And there's something about um also just watching the video, there's something about the physicality of some of the different things that really adds a nice dimension to it. Uh,
Mhm.
is that just sort of like a side, like a product of the piece? Like,
Yeah, I mean it's one of those things that I worked with like endurance for so long and I still kind of do, but it's not like something I'm like doing really consciously anymore. It's just a byproduct of writing long repetitive pieces. But it is something that I think about and I really, really like of it sort of heightens the experience of the music for me in a live setting to also notice that these people in front of you are doing something that's like physically really tough.
mhm,
Like there was the Mevo String Quartet just premiered a piece also in Germany last month that the piece is slow, it's an hour long, it's almost entirely quiet, and it's generally not technically hard to play at all. It's like very delicate, but again, it hadn't occurred to me until I saw it live how stressful it was to play that piece. Like after it was over, I all four of them, their arms at backstage were just like because it's both mental and physical effort, and the performance was just unreal. Like it just felt like no one could breathe for an hour. Like it was way beyond what I thought the piece was going to be in a great way. So yeah, I wasn't thinking about that with either of these pieces. It's just something that I'm kind of aware of that happens that I like. But then in the string quartet, that was a particularly like extreme case because it's an hour with almost no time to rest, and so it's really tough.
yeah, and it might seem simple on the page, but the actual physicality of it is a different story.
Yeah.
Super cool. Wait, my other notes. Let me see. Um, I'm trying to think how to put this. Um, oh, so one thing that's a really cool sound in the piece that some people might be interested in is the piano sounds. So you put like blue tack, and is that like tape or is it a tape?
It's that reusable putty that you can hang posters
Oh,
with.
I thought, yeah, the blue putty.
I heard it called blue tack in college once in a score, and I just have been calling it that. I think it's what they call it in the UK.
Okay.
Uh, but you'd think by now I would have looked up like maybe it's like poster putty or something, but it's a way to get the muted piano sound without having to use a hand to touch the string. And I just really, really love that sound. Like I love it. I have a whole piano solo where the almost the entire piano is muted with that stuff, and it's like I don't know why I love it. I just do. I mean, I can tell you things about it that I like, but in the piano part, there's several pitches that are just muted like for the entire piece.
Yeah, and in the upper register, it like creates a really there's also like the key sound that comes with it.
It's the key sound in like the highest notes. It's just
And
this
those
knocking noise
yeah, yeah, it's like a
because
not
the string is the vibrating part of the string is so short that if you mute it at all, it's just this like clacking sound. Love
yeah.
it. Such a good sound.
It's such a good sound. And like
Yeah.
when you're hearing it, I'm like, what is that? Like it's one of those immediate, you're like, what is that? How is that sound happening? And you just want to
Right.
talk about it. Like,
Yeah, it's really simple. It's just putting some putty on a string.
um, let me see. Um, So, okay. So another question I have about this piece is kind of not really like pitch, but sort of the sounds that you create. When you create the sounds, is it, and like the chords in some of those sections, is it, I get the sense that like the creation of these things are more kind of about the timbre or like the feel of it as opposed to like being really specific in pitch. So,
Yes. I like for that reason, I really like so I nearly failed music theory in college because partially because I've just found it hard and I didn't want to do it, but I think there's like a deeper thing here where I have like a block with like melody and harmony. Like I really do. And I did as a percussionist also. So when I was a student, I found playing music in a key signature much harder than playing atonal music. And I don't know why. That's another one of these mysteries where it's just like, that's weird. But um from like an analytical standpoint, I'm trying to choose I would call it like really like neutral harmonies where it's like there are major and minor and dissonant and consonant things always happening at the same time. So it's like like with Alban Lucier's music, he's so interested in the sine wave because if you're interested in the physicality of a room, if putting a neutral sound source into the room means that you get more information about the room than if it was like a piano or something. And I feel the same way that if the harmony is like quote unquote neutral, then you're hearing everything else around the pitches more than you would if I was working with a tone row or something, that it's just not, or maybe a better way to put it is it's just not what I'm concerned with at all.
yeah.
Um, and so it's like it's very I mean I should stop making this distinction between like sound people and music people, but I'm like a sound person, like heavily a sound person who also deeply loves music, obviously, but that by music I mean like traditional methods of making music. Um, so yeah, it's really I had been insecure about like failing ear training as a freshman for like my entire life, and I work with Kyle Gann at Bard, who's like a tuning expert and a master theorist, and I was telling him this story. I was like, Kyle, like I've been bad at ear training my entire life, and he just went, "Why would you be good at it? You're a percussionist." And I just was like, "Wow, why did it take me 30 years for someone to tell me this?" Like this was like a year ago. It made me so happy that he said that to me. I was like, "Thank you for like letting me know that I don't need to be good at this."
Yeah. Yeah.
But
So
in a way, it's tied to what we were talking about earlier about like the music being this expression of my like specific humanity or identity of like, but also like interrogating, trying to unmake sense of things I don't understand, which is like, why am I a very talented percussionist who finds it really hard to play in D major? Like it's like I don't understand it. It's weird. Like it doesn't bother me, but it's very strange.
yeah. Um, the kind of to bring it almost full circle, but like would you say like your music is kind of like an expression of your subconscious self or like it's like almost a way of discovering something about yourself that you're not conscious of?
All of the above.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, it's not only that, but that certainly is like a big driving force that I mean, I have a student here who was telling me they wanted to do their senior project about this really, really intensely personal stuff. And I really like the student too. And I was like, well, what's the point of why would someone make a piece of music about this? Like, or why would you do this? Like, what's the point of doing something about something that's like really, really difficult for you into music? And he was like, well, it kind of gets it out of you and you can like look at it from the outside and like, you get it out. And then I was like, well, what's the purpose of psychotherapy? And he went, I don't know. And I just was like, oh my God, like, can I please? I didn't say that. I was like, can I please give you a hug and just push you towards a mental health counselor. I'm joking. Like I really like this student, what I mean is that like it's the same thing, you know. It's just that you get art out of it, out of one of them, and something else out of the other one. But to me, it's like really similar. It's there's a kind of like relief to it or something where it's like I remember at the premiere of Clock Dies, I was sitting with my partner and I one of the I think it's the part where the glockenspiel is play I don't remember. There's like a bunch of different regular pulses all happening at the same time, and it's this one section where it just pushes into this new area of like what is happening. And I just started laughing and I leaned over and whispered and I was like, this sounds like the inside of my skull. Like it was like too almost like too real. And I was so happy because it like it did the thing. It's not like I was thinking about it that literally. Like it wasn't like today I will compose the inside of my brain. Like it's not that's not what I'm doing. And so when I heard it, I was like surprised that I had that response to it. But that's absolutely like but it felt good when that happened because you're like it feels good to like listen to a song and be like that's me. Like I got broken up with, you know, or that's like a trite, and it's not a trite example. It's just a simple example, but like, you know, I don't know, maybe not everybody feels this way, but a lot of people certainly like look to art and music to be like, oh, to like feel validated
Mhm.
and like seen.
Yeah. I think, well, I've heard like a lot of interviews with artists of various types, and like the ones that say like art as therapy, not like to work through it, but like
I would never call
happen,
my music art as therapy,
yeah,
but I
but like
kind of just
what
did.
happens as what I'm trying to get at is like people talking about how some of their best music like comes out and then afterwards they see it kind of like you were just saying they see it as
Yeah,
oh my gosh that is a reflection of me like they're
that
not
happened
doing
to
it
me.
in a
Oh, I'm
specific
sorry.
way. They're not doing it in a specific way, sorry, like to
No, no,
like
no.
go through it, but then upon reflection they see how it shows them.
That happened to me so many times that I started doing it consciously
Mhm.
of like noticing why do I keep remembering this same memory like that isn't significant, and so I put it into a piece of music, you know, and it revealed all this stuff. So
Yeah.
I mean it's just regardless of any kind of like self-help angle, it's just like the music is really exciting for me to listen to, you know.
So, well, I can't think of anything else. I feel like we covered this really well and it was a lovely conversation. Is there anything else you want to share, Sarah?
I don't think so. I'm just I like I this piece is really special to me because it felt like a moment where I was like, oh, I'm gonna do this kind of thing now. Like where it was like I was doing this and now I'm doing this. And I'm just the work that I just had played in Darmstadt was like really special. And um it's like a direct outgrowth of this piece. And so I'm really like I'm happy to talk about it.
Oh, it's amazing and it makes me excited to hear more, like more of your future output.
Yeah.
So, so thank you again so much, Sarah.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks a lot.